Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Michael Hawley is in the room.
Yeah, that's right, Al. And I'm excited about this one here because I have some connections. I live in the Buffalo area. So Haunted Hamilton is very close to me. So, and also I've got a Jack the Ripper lecture for Adam Berry. He's that Kindred Spirits actor. He does ghost hunting stuff. So I was curious about what Mark has to say about Haunted Hamilton.
Well, there you go. Maybe it's haunted. I don't know.
Well, and also that Tumblety, the suspect that I do, he had an office in Hamilton for quite some time. So, and he molested a young man, and he got the crap beat out of him by the mother in Hamilton.
Wow, there you go.
So he's a ghost there. He's a ghost there somewhere.
Yeah, he's hanging out. He hangs out with Mark. Our guest today is Mark Leslie. He's returning, and his book, Haunted Hamilton, and it's the ghosts of Dundurn Castle and other steel town shivers. Welcome to the show, Mark.
No, thanks for having me, Alan. Good to see you, Michael.
Nice speaking with you, Mark.
So Mark, what's going on here? It's funny because I had no idea that you did these kinds of books. Well, no, because you've been on before, and it's been sci-fi, fantasy, sort of
right.
thriller, and that sort of stuff like that. And all of a sudden, Haunted Hamilton. Oh, I had no idea. Where did this come from for you? How did you get involved in the haunted community?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I never thought I would write nonfiction and do research about ghosts. I was always writing horror novels, urban fantasy, like you said, sci-fi, thrillers, stuff like that. When I first moved to Hamilton in the late 90s, I went on the ghost walks. I went on a ghost walk in Ottawa years earlier, and for the first time in my life, I thought history was actually interesting for the first time because of the way that the historic ghost walks you can't tell a good ghost story without digging into some history. And so I went on a ghost walk in Ottawa, and I went, wow, history is interesting when you paint it in the right way. And so when I went to Ottawa or Hamilton, and I moved from Ottawa to Hamilton, I wanted to learn more about this city. That was my wife's city where she grew up. And so I went on a bunch of the ghost walks, and I was fascinated. And I was like, oh my God, there's so much cool history in the Hamilton area. And I was talking to Stephanie and Daniel, who were running the group Haunted Hamilton, the ghost walks. I'd gone on a bunch of their ghost walks, and I said, you guys should really do a book. You have got some great stories. I've been a bookseller since the early 90s, and I was always thinking, as a writer and bookseller, I was always thinking about books. And they said, well, we're too busy, but if you want access to our research, have at it. And so I thought, well, hey, that would be interesting. They're Canada's largest independent publisher, Dundurn. I was in a business meeting with the vice president, and I'd overheard Beth say, just offhandedly, we've always wanted to publish a book of ghost stories about Hamilton. And so Dundurn Press is actually named after Dundurn Castle. Kirk, the founder of the press, close to 50 years ago, loved Dundurn, and that's why he named the press that. And so that's I also, in the pitch, I included Dundurn Castle in the subtitle, just because I knew that about the history. And lo and behold, a one-page proposal that I looked in the position that there were no other books of haunted ghost stories about Hamilton, and there was a full-time ghost troupe that had been operating for 10 years, so I knew there was a market for it, and there were plenty of other great ghost stories written by folks like John Robert Colombo, from across Ontario and Canada. So I pitched it to them, and this was a funny one because they wrote back and said, hey, what a great idea, let's do this. Well, I knew they were looking for one, so that was that insider bit. And they said, if you can get us this manuscript in the next few weeks, we could get it in the fall catalog this year, which is rare for traditional publishing. And so I thought, now I have to write this book. So I took a week off work. I was managing one of those big box stores known as Chapters here in Canada, like a Barnes and Noble type stores. I took a week off work and I wrote the book and turned it in, and that kind of kickstarted me doing other books for other cities in Ontario, where I live, where I have lived, and other themes as well. So that was kind of maybe a pretty pivotal moment for me to go from being the guy who likes to make up scary things to the guy who now has to research and write about scary things.
Now, I'd imagine when you go through an experience like this and you're putting together these stories, you're doing a compilation of this. Does it influence your writing now when you create stories?
Oh yeah, for sure. And this is the interesting thing. I think I adapt a lot of my fictional skills into the stories, because when you get the research, you realize that you have details, and the details are interesting and they're intriguing. But what you have to do is you have to try and turn those details into a story arc, right? With character and mood and feeling and stuff like that. And of course, you're going to take some creative license and add some elements to it. But there are times when I do research or I hear a story, and whether or not, I mean, a lot of stuff doesn't make it into a book, because unless it's part of a chapter, like I have to have enough details to write a full chapter on it. And sometimes the full chapter is all these different elements that all are thematically tied together. So there's a lot of stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor, but some of the cutting room floor stuff inspires the what ifs that lead to me wanting to write fiction. You know, researching haunted, for an example, researching the Haunted Museum of Nature in Ottawa, Ontario for Creepy Capital, I ended up leveraging that haunted location as the opening scene in a ghost story that I had sold to an anthology a few years later. So there's never wasted research. I can almost take the same story, the same details, and here it's a nonfiction essay or article that becomes a chapter in a book, and there I can just run wild with it and go wherever I want to go in my fiction.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So now when you get into the Haunted Hamilton book itself, was there any one or two stories that sort of really freaked you out, so to speak, or something that you didn't expect, you know, not your typical, you know?
There were a few, but I think the one that personally got me the most was one of the story that I call the Tombstone Ghost. And this is a tale of a man who shares this. It comes from a bunch of articles, a bunch of newspaper articles from the Hamilton Spectator. And the way that the story starts is this man wakes up in the middle of I think it's the early 70s. Wakes up in the middle of the night. His wife is screaming, and he sits up, and she's sitting up, and she's just looking pale as a ghost. And he says, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I was laying asleep, and I felt something weird. I came out of my dream. I opened my eyes, and there was a woman floating over our bed. And she had these hollow, sunken eyes, and she was staring at me, terror on her face. And the woman laying in bed could not scream. And then when she finally voiced her own scream, the woman took off to this one corner of the room, disappeared into the wall." And that kind of freaked them out. It happened again and again. She kept waking up in the middle of the night, seeing this. When it was just this interesting, this top half of her body was visible. Her arms, her torso, her eyes, long, scraggly gray hair, and these really sunken, deep eye sockets. They finally brought in an exorcist. They brought in paranormal investigators, and this was an article in the early 70s in the Hamilton Spectator. They brought in some researchers from the U.S. as well, and then they ended up getting a medium who found out that this was a woman who had died in this house, and apparently she was looking for her children. These are the details they knew. And then they later found out that there was a woman who had been in a wheelchair, so only the top half of her body was, functional. and had lost her children. But they didn't find this out till I think it was 10 years later. This man and wife had moved to another location, and they were tearing down the building they lived in. It was like a small, a bunch of apartments in this building, to put up a parking lot or whatever. And they found in the wreckage, right near the wall where the woman kept disappearing into, these tombstones of her children. And they matched the name of the people who lived in the house and stuff like that. I guess her children had died in the house that was on that location, and apparently in the building or the construction of the new building, the tombstones were right there in the wall. And I think it looked like the woman was trying to get their attention by going to that wall and trying to draw them to that area. But that story was one of the ones that freaked me out the most, because it takes place over the course of 10 years. And it was interesting to see them return to that story. It's like, 10 years ago we reported this, and now we have this new update. So that was really interesting. But what was the freakiest part of it was this artist's rendition, this sketch of what the woman had seen, with the ghost, the scraggly hair, and the deep sunken eyes. And I was back at work, still working on it, still working on the book, and I was up till probably 2 a.m, and my wife and my kid were asleep upstairs, and I'm downstairs in the basement in the dark at 2 a.m, and I've got all these photocopies of the newspaper archives in front of me, and I just finished the chapter, and I'm still kind of just chilled to the bone about this, and I'm looking at that sketch. And all I can see is that woman when I close my eyes. And I was terrified to go upstairs and walk, turn off the lights and go all the way upstairs through the darkness up to bed. I actually considered sitting in the chair and with all the lights on, maybe I could sleep here. I think I lasted about 15 minutes before I finally got brave enough to go upstairs. But I just remember that was one of the first times I'd finished writing a chapter and looked at the photo or the sketch. And it just brought me right into the story, and I imagined, well, what if I wake up and see something like that? So that one really got to me.
You ever do research of the background to see who possibly was that ghost or anything like that?
Oh yeah. They found out. I'm trying to. It's such a long time ago that I remember. They did find the name of the woman and the family who had lived on this property. Like, they had done a bunch of research, and that was all in the newspaper. But yeah, that was a disturbing one, because, there was this thing that happened. The medium was pretty close with what she was pulling up in terms of who this woman was and what she was doing, like looking for her kids. And that just makes you kind of wonder about the things that we experience, and we're not properly interpreting them sometimes. I mean, that happens you don't even have to get into the paranormal to get into that, but you just wonder, there are more things in heaven and earth, right, than are dreamt of in our philosophies. And so that was an interesting case of that.
That's why I was curious about the haunted Hamilton, because I was telling you that the Jack the Ripper suspect that I talked about, Tumblety, he had an office in Hamilton in the 1850s, and then to the west there, and then there are some murders in America that are Ripper-like, but Ontario's like in 1894 in Listowel. Isn't that just west of you?
Yeah, it is. Listowel is just west of that area.
Yeah, there was a woman, a young girl murdered there, and they thought possibly it was Jack the Ripper. It was 1894.
Wow.
So I was wondering if you were going to involve with that, or if it's going to be part of Haunted Hamilton too, or something.
You know what? I did find out about that story after the book had been written. Actually, Daniel had done a ghost walk the night we launched the book in the downtown library in Hamilton, and took us on we had a mini ghost tour after the book signing, and went to one of the alleys that this alleged Jack the Ripper who came to Canada. And that one of my favorite photos is a picture of my son how old was he at the time? He was probably 8 years old. at the time, and he's there with there's a whole bunch of people around. There's a picture, and his eyes looked as big as dinner plates. As Daniel's telling this, but he was telling the story of that gentleman, and again, there wasn't a lot of details. I imagine you have a lot more details than they had about this gentleman, and I don't think
I'm on my third book on the guy.
Yeah, so you've got a lot more research on him, but when you mentioned that, I thought, oh yeah, of course, I've heard that story, but I've never done anything with the book. I did mention in Voice Map is a GPS-enabled walking tour app, and I did a downtown Hamilton walking tour through Voice Map. I think I released it in 2019. And I did include a few details about that gentleman. And as you're on the walking tour of downtown Hamilton, I said, and off to your left is an alley, one of which this guy might have been skulking around after he left London.
Right. Well, definitely before. And then again, as I was telling you, he owned 3,000 acres in Guelph.
Wow.
And and then actually my next book was going to be Jack the Ripper in Canada. But I've got other things too. But I think you've got a lot of stuff right there.
yeah. No, it's so fascinating. It's so fast, and that you've got so much detail on this guy, which I find so fascinating.
Yes, exactly.
Well, do things like this, like when you do a book like this, does it change your perspective on haunted and ghosts and all that stuff, or do you just sort of stay neutral?
I try really hard to take a journalistic approach, and I look at it with an open-minded skepticism. And there is a story in Haunted Hamilton that's a perfect example of this. It's a story called The Murder Mansion, and it's this mansion up on Hamilton Mountain that was not too far from the neighborhood where I was living at the time when I wrote this book. And my wife used to walk by that house when she was a kid, like on our way to different neighborhoods. And she said, when they were kids, nobody went near that. It was always abandoned. It was closed down. No one lived there. It was this empty, spooky house on the edge of the escarpment. And they would always walk on the far side of the street. And I'd heard the story that the man who lived in this house went into the shed, grabbed a hatchet, murdered his family, and then he went up onto the Widow's Walk and hung himself, looking down on the city of Hamilton. And then, as the story goes, the next family that moved into the house after that, the teenage son found the axe in the shed, did the same thing, murdered his family. And allegedly you'd hear screams coming from the building, and you'd see this woman, it looked like her hair was on fire, running back and forth in the upstairs windows as if she was running away from someone. And those were the stories that were shared about this house. But here's what I found out, because I didn't want to just go with the stories, I wanted to find some sources. So I dug into it, and I could not find any axe murders that had happened in that neighborhood in 40-year, 50-year period. It also doesn't seem likely that if an axe was used for murder that they would put it back in the shed. It would probably be locked up in some sort of police evidence files somewhere. And I couldn't find any evidence of it. So when I was writing the chapter, I shared, here are the stories, here are the legends, and here's what I found out. And I've actually, disproved it. But my editor got really upset and said, you can't do that. I said, well, but I found that it wasn't real. And I actually spent 3 or 4 pages going into details on how this could not be true. And my editor talked me out of going into that much detail, and I cut it down to 1 page. Because I did want to have the integrity of saying, it looks like there's no evidence to back up any of these stories, but it's still a pretty cool story, huh? And the house is still creepy. Yeah. And interestingly, this is a choice piece of real estate that has still never been developed on. The house was finally torn down about 10 years ago. And every time I go by, I check to see. And the place has been, nobody buys it. It's just sitting vacant. You could probably put up 2 or 3 houses on that lot. It's really fascinating anyway. But yeah, I like the journalistic approach. And if I can disprove a ghost, I think it adds a little bit more credibility to the other stories that we can't find an explanation for.
I think your editor's pretty right, though, because a lot of people so much love conspiracies, all that there's a bigger crowd of those than truth is kind of playing second fiddle nowadays.
Yeah, of course, it really truly is. But I mean, I do love to approach it with that willing suspension of disbelief, but I can't suspend it so far that I'm gonna call it a flat Earth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's strange. So now this book originally was written quite a few years ago, and let's talk about why it's getting all of a sudden the attention. It's like the one book, one community. Like, what's that all about?
Yeah, so this was published in 2012, so 13 years ago, and then earlier this year in March, somebody from the Haldimand County Public Library, which is located in the the Niagara Peninsula of southern Ontario, so south of Hamilton, sort of west of Niagara Falls, reached out and said they wanted to pick this for a one book, one community. And the one book, one community is a program that different cities all over the place have, where they choose a book and they encourage as many people as possible to read the book. And then they do a bunch of events. They make the book available, widely available through the library. They order tons of copies. They make it available through local bookstores. They encourage people to get the book, read the book, and then talk about the book, and then bring in the author for a bunch of different events. And so they chose, honor of all honors, they chose Haunted Hamilton. They did tell me they had wanted to, because the librarians were excited about my other book, Tomes of Terror, Haunted Bookstores and Libraries. They really liked that one because it was about bookish locations, but they thought they would go with Hamilton instead because Haldimand County's just beside the Hamilton. The city of Hamilton is the biggest city close to that region. So they thought the local interest would be more fascinating for local people to get into. So I'm honored 13 years later that this book is back from the dead, let's say.
Well, there you go.
I like that.
It's resurrected.
Oh, there you go. See, good words.
And also, Mark, I live 10 minutes from Niagara Falls, so I'm going to have to haunt that Hamilton there. I'm going to
you're
check that out.
Just across the border, yeah.
He's going to haunt it a long time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. So what do you got working on now? Now you got this that you're promoting and doing stuff. What's going on in the back room in the basement of Mark Leslie?
Well, I mean, I've got the next book in my Canadian Werewolf series, and I'm always working on the next book there, and that's going to be called A Canadian Werewolf in London, Ontario. And he comes back from Manhattan to his old howling grounds to investigate some stuff from his youth. But what I'm writing now in this vein is Woolsack and Wynne is a longtime Hamilton publisher, and they want me to write, and I've signed a contract with them to write a book called Ghost Stories of the Great Lakes. And I'm going to be writing that, and I'm going to circumnavigate at least Lake Ontario and Lake Erie in my research over the summer. Yeah, I have to turn that in at the end of the year, and this is coming out next fall. So I'm kind of excited about that because all my other books were either, were specific locations, haunted hospitals, bookstores, libraries, or Canadian cities. This is an interesting one because the lakes themselves are going to be the subject, and there's so many stories from the Ontario side as well as obviously Ohio and upstate New York and Michigan and things like that.
I'm close friends with Mason Winfield, who does the ghost stuff and those stories on this side of the border, so I could put you in contact with him.
Oh, Michael, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm looking for, and again, when I use references from people who do this, I love to make sure that the people who are reading the book know about them. Hey, this is someone who runs tours or whatever, or has these other books that you might want to check out. Because I think we always helping one another out is a key in this author business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's talk about how people find you, how they find the book, everything like that. Website. Where do they find Mark?
Well, you can find me at markleslie.ca. That's markleslie.ca. If you want to check out my books, the true ghost story books, or my urban fantasy or horror or whatever, if you go to books2read.com, that's books, the numeral 2read.com/Mark Leslie, you'll find a link to my books there in print, in ebook, in audiobook, and you can ask for them at your local library, because it does help authors when you ask for their books at your library. So, and then you can read them for free.
Ooh, there you go. And are you doing social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm YouTube, etc. And all those links to my social media you can find at markleslie.ca.
Perfect. Are you going to be doing any book shows? Or are you going to anywhere special this year? Are you doing any of those Thriller Fest or anything like that?
I mean, I'm doing a bunch of them. I'm actually driving out to Fredericton to speak at a writers' conference in New Brunswick. And I'm going to be at Salt Lake City Fan Expo. In the fall, I'm going to be in Vegas. I'm going to be in Calgary. I'm going to be at all kinds of different locations. Yeah.
Boy, you're working it. Working the streets, I'll tell you.
That's right. That's
Getting
right.
it all done. Well, we appreciate you coming on, talking about this revamping of the book or reselling of the book.
Yeah.
It's Haunted Hamilton, and it's the ghosts of Dundurn Castle and other Steeltown shivers. So thank you for being here, Mark Leslie.
Thanks so much, Alan.
Great speaking with you, Mark.
Good to chat with you, Michael.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.